Elden Ring. Holy shit, this game hits you hard right from the intro. There's many positive things I can say about Elden Ring, like how well exploration is done, the well-known combat the Souls games are known for, the variety of playstyles and builds you can make, the absolute lack of microtransactions, and the amazing level design that I think is one of FromSoftware's strongest qualities and isn't talked about enough. But today we won't be praising the game. I'll save that for a future video. Instead, we are going to be talking about a much spicier topic, and it might annoy some people.
Nice.
Are you prepared to commit a cardinal sin? Very well. Let my hand rest upon you for but a moment.
This one is a bit more minor, but I think it can definitely be frustrating during certain parts of the game. Those bad camera angles when fighting large enemies.
He just doesn't... I can't fucking... Where is he? Like, Jesus Christ! I hate this boss! Oh my god! Stay on a big bird, you can change the lock position? I need to try that, maybe, I don't know.
The encounters where you engage dragons or giant beasts of some sort? Yeah, they really need some type of camera zoom out feature during these. You'll be attacking the creature's foot like you're an ant trying to stab God, and can barely see the attack animations that are happening around you. Sometimes you have to guess what's about to happen and praise the sun that you hopefully land that correct dodge roll. This can be a drawback and why I tended to prefer fighting the more humanoid-sized creatures. I think in their next game they should definitely add in some sort of zoom out mechanic when locking on with your camera, or at least make the lock-on system somewhat smarter. Now hear me out, I know some people will die on the hill when it comes to FromSoftware's approach on cryptic storytelling, and I get it. I know that Miyazaki referenced his childhood in that he read Western fantasy books as a child with the ability to only understand some English words. This led him to make up large parts of the story himself and fill in the blanks, which he mentioned enjoying a lot as a child, and was one of the key decisions to the style of storytelling his team would design in Dark Souls and future games. This is really cool, and offers somewhat of a fresh take on stories in gaming, but I think there's a balance to be had here. Extremely cryptic storytelling can lead players to be less emotionally invested in an adventure, and of course, if going too far in the other direction, very direct storytelling in a game can sometimes feel like a chore, scrolling through paragraphs of dialogue waiting, wondering when the game part actually starts. FromSoftware already proved they can do it well with something like Sekiro, that had a bit more direction with the story, and I think Elden Ring would benefit from this. It's a very large game with many hours to be played. The world is actually interesting, and the more you read up on the lore, the more you realise how unique it is. I think the game would have benefited from just a bit more direction when it comes to the story, giving players more insight on what's going on in the world and the background of certain characters and places. It can still be left somewhat cryptic and mysterious. Like I said, it doesn't have to be a lot more direct, but just a bit more to give players further emotional investment and immersion in their role and the journey within the lands between. I don't know about you, but personally I always feel that Souls combat doesn't really feel well designed for 1v2 boss encounters. They always end up feeling a bit awkwardly designed. Don't get me wrong, they still work, but these fights always felt more clumsy. Perhaps FromSoftware can further iterate on the combat system in future games to better implement group boss fights. This also could potentially be fixed with a larger zoom out or smarter camera when engaging boss fights with multiple enemies. The player can then better see two different enemies' telegraphed attacks and have an opportunity to react if they have sufficient skill. We of course have the summoning system of spirits, an ability to summon other players in Elden Ring, but many prefer to go it alone and take on the game's toughest challenges, so hopefully they can continue to build on the combat or camera system in the future to make 1v2 boss encounters feel more fun. One-note gameplay. I haven't heard someone use this phrase before, and I don't think it's a term that's been mentioned online, so I'm claiming it as my own. Now let me explain what I mean here. In Elden Ring, what are the things you do the most in the game? Combat. And the other biggest thing you'll do is exploration. The exploration is great in this game. I personally was always intrigued and motivated to explore these unique areas and find hidden trinkets and locations. But a lot of the time, also, exploration is there to serve the combat. It's beautiful set pieces and environments to get you from one encounter with an enemy to the next, one fight to the next fight. Yes, a lot of games have combat as their core experience, but there tends to be other mechanics or ways to interact, especially in a large open world game. I think a lot of the time Elden Ring kind of feels like a combat simulator, lacking other mechanics or ways to interact with the world. Obviously, all the Souls-style games sort of feel like this, but I think for Elden Ring specifically, when you have a game so large and much more open world than its predecessors, some other ways to interact with that world would only benefit the game. I think one common complaint some people had with Elden Ring was that it felt too long, or that some players started to feel burnt out in the later stages of their playthrough. Now let's look at Zelda Breath of the Wild for a moment. When focusing on just the main objectives, it said that a playthrough would take a person just over 50 hours. When looking up the same info for Elden Ring, it's similar at just under 60 hours. But you don't really see the same common criticism for Breath of the Wild in terms of the game feeling too long. I'd argue that's because Zelda has a lot more variety in its gameplay. It helps to break up the pace at certain moments and give the player space to breathe with downtime when they want, to do other things like cooking or exploring the towns around the world. Now Elden Ring does have crafting and the round table hold, so there's similarities there, but I think it's obvious that Elden Ring does feel more one note with its gameplay, or almost like a combat simulator compared to Zelda. I think if Elden Ring had some optional ways to interact with the world during these moments, when the player wanted to break up the pace of constant combat, this would have helped. I know the world is broken down and decayed, but perhaps a few more small settlements like the Round Table hold, but instead within the world and not as a separate space, where the player could interact with NPCs and other things within these areas. This could add more immersion and believability to the lands between, showing other tarnished NPCs on their own journeys, perhaps being able to pick up a couple more side quests and learn a little about the world. You could have some optional things you could do here too, perhaps chase down some new saddles for Torrent your horse, or dare I say it, something like fishing. I think you are probably getting at what I mean here. These little aspects could help break up the one-note gameplay, but I think should certainly remain completely optional to the player. One thing I love about Elden Ring is its feeling of freedom. It has that old school feel like Ocarina of Time, to go and do what you want and not be bogged down by a to-do list of menial tasks like a lot of modern games suffer from today. And bringing up Zelda is a good reference, I think. Ocarina of Time is one of Miyazaki's favourite games growing up, and is said to be one of the games, if not the game, to push him into wanting to become a game designer and completely change his career in his 30s. Which is a big thing to do in itself, especially in Japanese culture, where most people tend to stick to one company after graduation for most of it, if not all their life. I think when I look at the Souls games, I can see the influence of the older Zelda titles everywhere. If you think about it, Dark Souls could have been a similar design direction that modern Zelda games could have gone down after Ocarina of Time, if they had decided on a different path, and leaned more on the darker parts of the Zelda universe. Repeatable enemies and boss fights. Now this point is quite understanding for something as large as Elden Ring, and can be easily forgiven given the great quality of the game. But there are some fights that grow tiring after facing the same enemy several times. For me, dragons started to get old quite quickly. They are damage sponges with the amount of hits it takes to chunk one down, and most tend to have the same attack animations and very similar 3D models to each other, with just a few different gimmicks like the Scarlet Rot in one area, or the Frost attacks in another. After fighting several dragons, I grew tired of facing these enemies, although I will say the visuals of the fights were always a spectacle to look at. One of the biggest culprits of this issue for me was the Knights Cavalry. You fight this mini-boss several times. Yes, they are optional, but that doesn't mean that they don't get tiring, and I wanted to keep fighting them in hopes of getting that sexy armor dropping after a kill. It would have been good if their attack animations and behaviour was more uniquely different for each Knights Cavalry, but again, I get it, they probably just didn't have enough development time to add in these further details, but it certainly could have been something that would have made the game even better. Let's discuss the side quests of the game. A lot of them give the player more insight into the world and story within Elden Ring. Some can even take the player down a variety of branching paths, where they may even have multiple endings. However, while this is great, the side quests at many stages can be extremely unclear on where you need to go next or what you are even supposed to do. It's pretty normal to hear from players that they may have never found out how to actually finish some of these without googling or using a wiki. I won't dive deep into spoiler territory, but there are moments where the player will need to find specific items without any guidance on where to go, or interact with an item in a very specific way at a precise location. These can 100% be easily missed, and would then block you from moving forward with that side quest. Ranni or Fia's questlines can be two examples of this. This is likely FromSoft's intention, as perhaps they want to maintain that aura of mystery, allowing you to constantly discover new things with each new playthrough. This makes sense, and I really like the idea. If the internet didn't exist or was fairly young, like back in our childhoods, it would make the impact of one of your friends telling you about a secret or how to advance that side quest more impactful. But we live in a modern age where information online is readily available. I personally think that too many of the side quests are too unclear with their direction, which leaves many googling what to do next, wondering how they would have figured it out through just playing. It would be better if the game had clearer direction on specific side quests, while maintaining the mystery in others. The ones that are more obscure should hold more reward for the player. This would be a more balanced approach, maintaining mystery and discovery while eliminating the use of external sources as much. One thing I did find quite jarring was lack of context when a character in the world asks you to join or serve under them. Too often in Elden Ring was I playing the game when I'd meet a character like Ranni or members of Volcano Manor, and they would ask you to join or commit to their cause, without you really knowing who they are or what they want to achieve. Sometimes I was left wondering, if I join these characters, will this lock me out of other choices later in the game? I think it only makes sense to give the player some more info into these characters or what their goals actually are. It is a role-playing game after all. Let me consider these choices, as minor or major as they may be. Overall, like I said at the beginning, Elden Ring has become one of my favourite games I've ever played. It truly is a refreshing experience compared to a lot of modern games, and likely a masterpiece. Even though I said earlier Zelda Breath of the Wild has more varied gameplay, and this is true, I personally prefer Elden Ring over it, because what Elden Ring does well, it does extremely well. I'll touch on this more in another video, but that's it for me today. What do you think? Do you agree or disagree with my points, or how do you think Elden Ring could be made even better? I hope this video was thought-provoking at the least, and I thank you for watching. Please drop a like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you in the next one.